Uh, all right, let's see where we were. We were in dealing with intervals. And so, back to intervals. That is, okay, and so one of the, we talked about consonant and dissonant intervals. One of the ones that didn't make it into this bullet was really the perfect octave, but you know, I should have put that back in there. But so within the thing about consonant is, so we do believe in our ear hears the major and minor thirds and sixths as consonant intervals. Meaning that those intervals they don't sound disturbing. They don't sound like they absolutely need to resolve to something else. So it's about tension and release. So the third and the sixth don't create all that much tension, although they do have a tendency they want to release somewhere. And by the way, the fifth, the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth, they want to go somewhere. They don't want to stay there very much in the context of home. This is one of the reasons why we consider, you know, the interval of a fifth is actually considered another name for it is a dominant, and it's called a dominant because it wants to go home, you know. And so many of the pieces that we actually have written in music, when you get to the end of a piece, or when you get ready to end a piece, the thing that lets you know that you're coming home is that fifth interval. It's like, oh, I'm almost there. I'm almost there. So it's kind of like you always see that in the denouement of a piece of music. You actually just kind of see it. Bum, bum, I'm done. Bum, bum, there. Bum, bum. That's that 5-1. That's that interval right there that tells you, I'm home. I'm home. And we see that in Western music, and there's so many examples of that in Western music, that it's almost not right to finish without it. And you can see it in classical music, almost every symphony. I don't know how many Beethoven things are. You know, Beethoven was known to actually add all of these codas to stuff. You think he's done? No, we have another 5 minutes. So he played with that. He messed with you. He says a lot of times, says, all right, here we are, we're home. And everybody in the audience says, okay, we're home. And no, not quite. He actually goes somewhere else with it. And then he kind of keeps going, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, forever. You know, it's not like, are we done? So there are people that can actually utilize these intervals and these feelings, these tendencies that we have for tension and release, and use them with really that's why they call masters, because they can masterfully manipulate that sensation that you feel when you listen to music. And that's what's so cool about all of this. It doesn't mean that you have to write music, or you don't even need to know what they're doing. You just need to be aware that they do this all the time. Okay? Sorry, I can't see the chat anymore. I wonder why. Okay. All right. So all other intervals, in particular the seventh, are considered dissonant intervals. I think that's what we finished with last week. I think that, you know, I was playing a C scale, and the B always it has that dissonance. Masters at what they do just play with that. The best example that I know of in recent history is Jaws with John Williams, because he just did that. He just gave that to the tuba. What? What? So he actually did that. You can't just listen to the tuba and go, that shark's not going anywhere. You know, the shark is dangerous because he's coming. It gives him movement. You know, it has that tension behind it. Why the tuba? Because it's from the deep, and I don't know if that's how he did it, but that's how you perceive it anyway. Something murky, something down there, you can't see it. It's like that, and it's coming for you. Uh-oh. That has that urgency to it, and that's how a master manipulates music to be able to reflect things like that. I think that to me the biggest programmatic master of them all was Richard Strauss. And if you're not familiar with him, make him your friend. And you'll find that a lot of modern music cliches actually come from one person, and you can trace it back to him. So listen to him. There's one that band people don't listen to him very much because he's an orchestra guy, but so what? Don't hold it against him. He's a really excellent composer. So check him out if you've never heard it. I think that things that are more accessible to us are his tone poems. And so if you put Strauss tone poems on Google, you'll see a list of some of these things, Don Quixote, and things like that. So just kind of whichever one suits your fancy, go with that one first and see how it goes. Okay. All right. So dissonant. All other intervals are dissonant. So we have the perfect intervals are those. So the tritone then is the biggest distance that we have between two notes, and I think we got to that last week. So in a scale, so if this is C and this is C, and knowing that we have 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12. Do it. Ah, thank you very much. All right, so we have 12 between the octave, right? Smack in the middle is this guy. So this guy is exactly the same distance from here to here is the same distance as from here to here. And that's a very, very dissonant interval. So when you play them both together, you have to turn your keyboard on for that to happen. Sadly, it's not happening. Probably because I have to close this. So I'll just do it with the... And I can't hit the sustain. I'm probably going to have to close off of this first and then get it back on. But when you actually play those two together, it's a very, very dissonant interval. And you can kind of see that it just it revolves around that particular axis. And this is one of the reasons why it's called a tritone, because it actually gets that it kind of triangulates these points here. Okay, it's the same distance from here to here as there is from here to here. So it's the furthest distance that you can actually get from two notes. That's another way to look at it. Within an octave, the furthest distance that you can get away from it. And the closest distance in Western tonality that you can get from two notes is also a very dissonant interval, which is the major seventh. And so the major seventh is the leading tone, or the B natural in a C scale. So that's also a dissonant interval. That's the one that we ended up with last week, and we call that a leading tone. So there's thank you, Mike, for getting those. If you look at some of the examples that Mike actually put out there, those are some that might get you listening to Strauss. If you don't like his music, then fine. Listen to somebody else. But if you listen to him and you listen to him critically, you will see where people like many modern composers, especially movie composers, actually get a lot of the idea. Not because they're plagiarizing, because some of them do, but it's just ideas of how it is that we want to communicate certain things. So like the idea of the horns and stuff like that in Star Wars being the space, the instruments that actually kind of create that big space thing, and the big intervals in the horns that Williams didn't just come up with that. He heard it before. And I'm not saying that he said, I'm going to copy Strauss, but he already had that in his vocabulary. And so that just kind of became second nature. Oh, we're talking about space. This is how we're going to do this. It's like Copland. His idea of the West was these big open intervals, and especially in the brass and stuff like that. And that's where you can kind of see him representing American music, because one of the things that America had was these open lands and all that kind of stuff. So that's why one of the reasons why he became, the composer laureate of America. All right, so dissonant consonant intervals. Tritone is the biggest distance between the two intervals. And then we have major intervals, and I'm going to switch over to my staff. Once more, I'm just going to start with the bass clef, and just you guys that are treble clef readers, you're just going to have to get over it. So let's just start with a C scale once more. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. If I were going to give these guys numbers, this would be 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, and number 8. And remember these, because we're gonna work off of these when we start looking at chords and how to put notes on top of each other. When you look at these numbers, there's somewhat of a hierarchy here in a major scale between these being the perfect intervals and everything else being the imperfect intervals. The third and the sixth are considered consonant, where the second and the seventh in a major scale are considered dissonants. Now, that doesn't mean that those are the only intervals that exist. There are intervals in between them. For instance, in the key of C major, you would not have a D sharp, but a D sharp does exist, and so does an E flat, and so does an F sharp, and so does a G flat, and so on. So there are other intervals that even though they don't belong in that key, they do exist, and even though you might be playing, a composer might be playing in C major, and for whatever reason they might choose a note or a passage that does not contain notes in C major. You just kind of go into a different key for a minute. And so those are called modulations. When you go from one tonality to another one, that's called modulating. So you go from C major to G major, or you might go from C major to F major. These are modulations, and you don't have to change a key to do that. You just kind of use accidentals if the notes are not within the original scale. So that's what we call it when we go from one to another one, and we just kind of push the tonality to a different one. That's called modulation. When you're talking about these intervals within the home bass, we call these diatonic. I'm going to write this down. Diatonic. These are diatonic. Tonic is something that you drink gin. No, I'm sorry. Tonic is something that has to do with your ear, the way that you hear them. All right, and dia in this case, it has the same root as like diabetes or diarrhea. This dia here means something that goes through you. So these are tones that actually go through your ear, and they just kind of penetrate the ear as being tonic, being as part of that particular scale. Okay, so major, so this is a one chord, a one triad, one. And so my homework to you guys were to actually put your fingers down on this like this. On your little keyboard. If you have a makeup keyboard, that's okay. You can just do this on a keyboard without sound, but so long as you make it up. So put your fingers here. So remember that you're going to give your thumb number 1 and your pinky is going to be number 5. And so if you just kind of skip the other ones, then you'll have 1 3 5 3 1 da dee dee da da, and that's your tonic, your one, your major triad in C. And that's important because that's home base for your whole composition if you were writing a composition around C major. Okay? Now look at what happens if when I change those numbers and I go, this is 1, this is 3, and this is my 5. It's the same distance between those notes. Let me change this. It's the same distance between here and here as it is between here and here. It's a major third. And it's the same distance between here and here, which is a minor third between here and here. It's the same distance from that as it is from this one. So it makes those two triads exactly the same, but starting on a different note. 1, do, mi, so. And if you were going to change to the key of F, do, mi, so. So it's the same thing, but just in a different key. But within my home base, within my C tonality, I'm hearing this as my home 1, and I'm hearing this as my something close, something very consonant, something that I'm very familiar with at home. So this is like my living room. All right, this is my address, and then this is my living room, and then this might be my bedroom. This is the 5th. This is also very familiar. So if I take the 5th, which means that I don't have to incriminate myself, if I take the 5th of that 1, 2, so I'm here on the 5th, and I build a triad on this, it sounds the same as the other ones, because the distance between the 1 and the 3 and the 5 is the same distance that I had. Whoops. I have to use a pen, don't I? 1, 3, and 5. Those are the same distances that I had on these other ones. So remember that was the F one? Okay, so here's home base. All right, here's my living room. Whoops, sorry. And here's my bedroom. And I'm back home. Yay! All right, so what I did right there is all I did was just based on these triads, I did from going from one to another one. When you're going from one triad to another one, in modern times we call that a progression. That means that you're progressing. You're going from one chord to another one, and those are called chord progressions. Not everybody thought this way, and by the way, the way that Polyphony started, it did not start this way at all. We'll get into that later, but let me just I want to finish with the triads so we know what the hell to call them. So these are all called major triads in the key of C. Your major triads in the key of C are represented by the 1, the 4, and the 5. So the 1, that's 1, that's the 1, the major C chord. The major 4th is in F, A, C, and the 5th, G, B, D. So if you stick with the key, if you stick with the diatonic notes of the C scale, and you always go 1, 3, 5, those are going to be the major triads that are produced by playing only in the key of C without bringing in any chromatics. Okay? And those are represented with a major, with a capital Roman numeral. So if I start my 1, 3, 5 here, let me use a pen this time. That's 1, this is 4, and this is 5. Okay? Now, if I apply the same system and I wanted to get my resulting diatonic triads from the other ones, the 2, the 3, and the 6, oops, are all going to have the same distance between their pitches. If I let that be the 1, that's a minor triad. 1, 3, 5. You hear that? Whoops. Ah. That sounds the same as, which sounds the same as, because it's the same distance between those notes. And so those are what we call minor triads. And in the diatonic scale of C, then your minor triads are building on the 2nd, on the 3rd, and on the 6th. So one more time, let's review. A major triad starting on the 1st, major on the 4th, on the 5th. Okay, and where do we want to go? We want to go here. Right? You see how that feels like home. All right, so that's our chord progression. That means we're in the key of C. Then the next thing that we need to look at is, let's look at these triads then. That, and this one, and this one. They sound the same, but they're in different positions within the key. The oddball of the group is going to be dun 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 dun. It's going to be Mr. 7th. And so in a major key, in the diatonic grouping, the most dissonant note that you're going to have, the most dissonant triad that you're going to have, is a 7th diminished triad. And the reason why it's called diminished, by the way, we should probably go through all of this. The reason why these are major is because in the key of C, you would have an E natural and you would have a G natural. So in the key of C, I know. So this is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then we're back to C, right? All right, so in the key of C, the 1, the 3, and the 5 are natural. In the key of F, the 1, the 3, and the 5th are natural. In the key of G, the 1, the 3, and the 5th are natural. That's why they sound the same. However, in the key of D, if you remember where in our circle of fifths, in the key of D, we should have 2 sharps. Which ones are they? F sharp and C sharp. Those are our 2 sharps, right? So in the key of D, we should have an F sharp. We should not have an F natural. But in the key of D minor, which has 1 flat, we do have an F natural. And that's why you see this 2 being a little minor 2, because the resulting triad is this, which would actually belong in the D minor key. And that's something common with all the little Roman numerals. In the key of E, if it was E major, we would have E, G sharp, and B. But in this case, we don't. We have a G natural, making that a minor triad. You see? And the same thing goes with A. In the key of A, we should have a C sharp as a third. But we don't here. We have a C natural. And that's what makes those minor intervals, is that second, that minor third is what makes it a minor interval. Okay? All right, so just because I want to concentrate on the seventh here, I'm going to continue labeling these D, E, F, A, B, C, just for the sake of argument. But look at what happens here with the seventh. If I do diatonically in the key of C, if I start on the B, it would be D, B, D natural, F natural. But in the key of B major, I should have what, 5 sharps, right? And so if in the key of B major I'm supposed to have 5 sharps, well, which ones are they? F, C, G, A, right? F, C, G, D, A, right? I missed one, sorry. So those are my 5. So in a key of B major, I should have B. If I'm going to do a major triad on the pitch B, I should go B, D sharp, F sharp. You see? But that's not what I have here. I have B, D natural, and F natural, which is kind of weird. So in the key of B minor, which would be relative to what? D major. In D major, I would have 2 sharps, which is the same thing that I would have in B minor. The 2 sharps should be C and F sharp. And so if I did that in B minor, my triad would be B, D, but still an F sharp. So if I want a minor triad on B, I would go B, D minor. You see that? But notice what happens here in the key of C. That's not the case. I have an F natural as well. Anytime that you lower the fifth, we call that a diminished. And that's what that little circle means. That this triad then becomes, the triad built on B in the key of C is a diminished triad. Not because it's a minor third between here and here, but because there's a diminished interval between this one and that one. And that's what makes that chord sound so weird. You hear that? Why? Because that note wants to go here. You see that? You see how it wants to go there? And this note wants to go there. So you have double leading tones here. You have two notes here that are causing dissonance. And they both want to go forward. They would just kind of want to go resolve it, move it, move it, move it. And this is why this triad right here feels different than the rest of them. The most dissonant triad in the diatonic grouping of the C major scale is really the seventh. Or any major scale, you'll find the same thing. The seventh is always going to be, if you're keeping diatonic triads, the seventh is always going to have that kind of tension to it. Okay? This is important because when you start really analyzing what composers actually do, you'll see that used a lot to be able to get you, to build those expectations and then to resolve them. And part of the creative process is not necessarily that a composer says, I need a diminished scale here. It's just really after the finished product that you actually analyze what I did with that. Why did I feel like I was going home with that? Oh, look what I did. I came up with a diminished, triad here. So it's actually kind of cool when you actually do that kind of study. All right. So that is basically our triad format. let me go back to my. Boy, this is as dry a topic as you can get in music. Sorry, I'll push through it, but that's the idea. And so, so that kind of covers the diminished. And so when we talk about a diminished interval, is really talking about anytime that you lower the octave, or anytime that you lower the fourth, or if you lower the fifth. Those are diminished intervals, because you take a perfect interval and you make it less than that. Now, if there are not the perfect intervals, if they're minor intervals, and you lower a minor interval, we also call that a diminished interval. So if you take a minor third, or if you take let's say that you would take a major third, and we lower it, and we lower it again, that's a diminished third. Do you see what I did? So if you take a sixth, a major sixth, and you lower it, then that's a minor sixth, and you lower it again, and that becomes a diminished sixth. We'll go through examples like that in a bit. Okay. Augmented means the opposite. Rather than actually going down on an interval, on a regular major interval, you actually go up. So when you take any note and you raise it, that becomes an augmented note. And that's also important when you're talking about triads, because an augmented triad usually indicates that you've augmented the fifth of that triad, an augmented fifth. Okay. All right. So this is for me. This is the good stuff, and this is where it stops being, for me, it stops being dry. So some of you guys are already kind of going, "Oh my God, I need a drink." But when we go back to actually the earlier samples of polyphony, there are some things that as old as as Western music is, some things stay consistent. Early polyphony was actually achieved by taking 2 or 3 or 4 people together and having them sing the same thing. Anytime that you had more than one person singing at the same time, that was called an organon. In other words, an organism, when you're talking about biology, an organism is an organization of cellular structures. In other words, biology that organizes itself into one conglomeration of things, and that's an organism. We are organisms. We're a cellular organization of cells and structures, according to biomedicine and bioscience. So in music, we have kind of the same approach in that when you have a bunch of people together making music, that's called an organon. That's why a keyboard that has a lot of different sounds is called an organ, because of this. Okay? I don't know. Nobody had ever explained that to me until I started doing research for this class. Imagine that. I wanted to give a little example here, and I'm gonna, pardon me for jumping back and forth from YouTube, but I really wanted you to hear an early sample of polyphony. So let me cue this up for you. All right, so let's listen to these guys here. I think that's kind of cool. Uh, so what you heard there, where they were singing the same syllable, and each one of them picked a different note to start on within that mode. And I think my ear picked it up as Locrian, but don't go by that. So they had one sense of home, one type of scale that they were both singing on, and each one of them was started on one pitch, and from that they kind of deviated, and they went on their own way, but they stayed diatonically. They stayed within that same mode. And so that's a very, very early example of how polyphony started to be used, singing basically the same thing, but then just picking different notes out of the same scale. And it's actually a pretty funky little sound. I think that it has a little jazz in it. And back then, and now mind you, that's 10th century. That's a 900 and whatever it is that it was. That's very, very early in terms of Western music. And so you can kind of see how the concept of home base, you see how they ended in a perfect prime at the very end. They ended in exactly on the same note, creating that sense of home base. And you kind of, when you listen to a piece like that, you really can hear the tension and release of those notes. Some being more dissonant and some being more consonant than others. So it took us in Western music. It took us hundreds of years to try to get to figure out, how to balance that tension and release. And we're still in that process right now. It's not a matter of just kind of being perfect at it. It's just a matter of developing that sense and manipulating, the way that music makes people feel by using these concepts of tension and release. Naturally, that changes as people's ideas of aesthetics change, because music and the arts altogether are an expression of what your current aesthetics are in society. So you can see that in the Baroque, you can see that in the Impressionists. This is one of the reasons why Western music, historical times in Western music, are usually given terms that were given to visual arts. And this is one of the reasons, is because society was responding, in one particular way, and artists were actually responding to that, and visual artists were kind of like, out there and making a representation of that, and musicians usually kind of lagged a little bit from the visual arts, but that's why. So Impressionism is a type of music that happened in the French style, but it wasn't really called that until the Impressionist artists were like Monet and stuff like that were actually doing their thing. And so when people listen to the music that was actually from that time period, then they kind of say, oh, okay, that must be Impressionist music, because society has changed, and we as musicians are part of that aesthetic. And that's what it is. Societies pick their aesthetic associations to what's happening in the world around them, and this is one of the reasons why new aesthetics usually lag, and people that are old fuddy-duddies like me, when a new aesthetic happens, I don't like it. Oh, that stuff. Oh, that's not music. Those young whippersnappers, But really, the realization is that everybody, and every generation goes through the same thing. It's just a different aesthetic, and how is it that a musician decides to actually manipulate those aesthetics to actually reflect what society has in store for that. Okay. All right. Let me see where I was. Okay. So that gets us back to, the next thing, which is, I'm going to give you another listening example in just a minute. So let me go back to my thing. And Warren, I read what you had to say about dominant and subdominant, and I'll go through all of that in a bit. I haven't forgotten about that. So let me see if my Yeah, if this wants to behave now. All right, um, so very early examples of polyphony started kind of like that. Everybody singing the same thing, but just kind of taking off, in different directions. And then as a progression of that, as that got a little bit more sophisticated, then we start having the realization that two lines going in different directions and having their own properties can be quantified as being part of what's called counterpoint. And this is where that concept kind of became crucial, because people started actually studying that concept of tension and release happening not just with tones, but also with rhythms. And that whole mess of that, the study of that, of how music actually relates to itself, is called counterpoint. So you have point, you have counterpoint. That includes that includes two parts to it. You can't just have counterpoint with, well, I guess technically you could have counterpoint with one melody line, but that's because you're comparing it to itself. But the counterpoint means that it's a comparative term, uh, that you start somewhere and you're developing that somewhere else, and that's the concept of counterpoint. And modern Western music has certain rules around counterpoint that everybody breaks. However, it's good to actually have those rules and those anticipated outcomes, because it kind of gives you a starting point. So every composer, or not every composer, but a lot of the composers, especially from the classical training, every composer that was trained up until the 20th century and beyond studies counterpoint. Uh, and it's not because every composition that they have to do has to adhere to those standards, but this is kind of like a visual artist or a painter studying classical painting. These are the basic strokes that they study. It doesn't mean that your painting must look exactly the same as Gauguin or anything like that. It doesn't have to be like that. But studying them gives you a base that you can develop from. So the study of counterpoint is one that a lot of us have actually diddled around with. The main the main text for that for centuries has been Gradus ad Parnassum, which is why I gave this whole series of lectures the name Gradus ad ACWE. And if it's a very accessible, it's written now. It's not written in Latin anymore, so it's written in English now. And if you want to work through that, you can work on it by yourself. And not only that, it's really cool about the interwebs is that you can see certain composers. You can actually see manuscripts of them working that text. So composers, I think it was Mendelssohn, that there are examples of them actually working through exercises from that book, which I think is just kind of really cool, because you're actually seeing these masters taking their baby steps, which is super cool. So anyway, counterpoint is actually talking about writing music and how it is that music comes together to be able to manipulate these tension and release concepts. So we have what are called canons, rounds, and fugues, and those are very early examples of counterpoint, for instance. And each one of those had their own little basic rules, and still, people are still writing these things today. I can't, Pachelbel canon and stuff like that. I can't. But one of the things that distinguishes a canon from a round is that a canon is usually development of one thematic idea that it doesn't have to repeat itself. It could, but it doesn't absolutely have to. A round is the same thematic idea, just kind of put aside from each other. Like an example of a round is row, row, row your boat. So a round is, the row, row, row your boat is not a canon, it's a round. So I started, and then you start the same sum, but you just started a little bit later. And then somebody can start it a little bit later. But in the middle, when we're all singing and we're all doing all of that, in the middle you have lots of things that are happening together that are lining up vertically. And over time and experimentation and things that people like and things that people didn't like, and taking the aesthetics of society in mind, then that got developed and more sophisticated the way the more we moved in time. And so that whole study of counterpoint, it right now is a very, very sophisticated one. And even though it has like what we consider rules, those rules are also meant to be broken, but you kind of have to know what you're doing to break them. And every great composer, even as early as this, even though they, like with fugues, Bach was a master at fugues, a master. If fugues have their own very, very strict formats. And the one who actually kind of wrote the book on how to write a fugue was Bach, and you see examples of Bach breaking those all the time, which is kind of cool. But it's like, it wouldn't be interesting. Those breaks in those rules would not be interested if the rules didn't exist. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's yet again that concept of tension and release. So we establish those rules so that everybody kind of knows, okay, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing. And a really good master says, we're going to go this way for a bit, and then we kind of return. You know? And it's just that kind of I don't know, pick one, just or just kind of not tongue in cheek, but that level of those little deviations from those rules that just kind of keeps things interesting for a lot of people. Otherwise, this whole concept of music would be just so boring if everything just kind of adhered to the same format and same rules over and over again. And I'll show you in a minute what how it happens in modern times, because you can see chord progressions right now. You can see a 12-bar blues chord progression that's all over the place. That people, it's the same progression, but there are bands like ZZ Top that have made a life out of that. I mean, a whole life out of that. You know, why? Because it's, you can do so much with those structures when you know how to manipulate them, which is really cool. That's the greatest thing about, one of the coolest things about composition. So as a result, we have things that are lining up horizontally, melodies and harmonies that are actually lining up horizontally, and they happen this way. But what people started really paying a lot of attention to is how it is that they meet vertically. When you write these things together, and they actually come together in space and time, and they happen at the same time. And that's also one of the things that counterpoint, if you know counterpoint, you can anticipate how these things are going to act. Which is really cool too. All right. I'm not going to go into this next thing, but you should probably know that at the very beginning of Polyphony, and at the onset, and through the medieval music, and going into the Baroque, and going into the Rococo, not so much into the classical period, but still, the people in the classical period knew how to play this thing, and even people in the modern period, they know about figured bass. Figured bass was a written bass line with numbers at the very bottom of the staff, and the numbers would tell you how the chords should line up vertically. And what it is, why that was important is because it gave bass players, people who played the very, very bottom line, how to approach and improvise a bass line based on the composer's wishes. So, you know, when we set the triads and all of that kind of stuff, you have C, E, G in a C triad. C, E, G, C, G, or C, E, G, E, G, E, C. I'm not saying it right. Do, mi, so, mi, do, right? So you have those in the three. But that doesn't always mean that you must start that on the do. You can start that on the mi. And it'll still sound the same, because you would have an E, a G, and a C. And if you also wanted to start it on the G, in other words, the G and the bass, you would have G, C, E, and so on. So the triad style still sounds the same, but you voice it differently. And so this is what the bass players, including keyboards, bassoonists, horn players, people that play down there down there, knew how to read what was called figured bass. And it was a way to actually improvise a bass line based on the chord structure that the composer had actually given them. It's a really, really interesting thing, and there are, if you actually read about it and look at a bunch of YouTube videos on this, it'll explain it to you. It's actually fairly easy to do, but I think as far as a band person is concerned, this is not a really, really important thing to actually do. Let me see, is it chat dealing with? Yeah. So figured bass is another name for figured bass is basso continuo. I'm gonna actually write this, and Michael actually said that right. Basso continuo. And I think that a very a very literal translation of that is bass. You kind of just go on and do your thing. So there were keyboards. The keyboard players would actually do a basso continuo line. Bassoon players would actually be written those lines. Cellos and double basses would be able to actually do this, or their counterparts. But it was usually the lowest part of the ensemble that would actually improvise the bass line, which is kind of, it's interesting because a bass is called a bass because it's the things that you actually build on. And so the possibilities of actually an improvised bass line are endless, and that kept the music being really interesting to people who were listening, because it was up to the individual to improvise the bass line. It's super cool. Okay. All right. And then, of course, humans being humans, we take evolution to we tend to swing penduli in different ways, and I think that's what happened. I think that history might be able to tell that this is what happened kind of in 20th century music, and that's arguable, by the way. I'm going to get into it. But I think that one of the reasons why I suggested the reading with Aaron Copland is because I think that he was right that as far as classical music is concerned, when people have so much choice of other music to listen to, one direction that classical music went to was something that was unattainable by the regular ears. You needed so much education to be able to listen to something like this that it just kind of went, whoops, I think we might have gone a little too far. And what you're seeing in classical music is not exactly a return to what used to be called a common practice, but a different type of evolution, a different type of philosophy that's actually occurring. And if you tie the it's so funny because the philosophy is doing exactly the same thing with modernism and postmodernism, and it's really cool to actually see how this is actually panning out in the arts as we're actually living through that time period. So when it's all said and done, and we actually look back at what used to be called the modern period, we just kind of guess, did we really have to do that? And I think that we did, but it's because of the kind of growth that we're manifesting now. So anyway, that's another diatribe. I wanted to give you an example of this melody because this is a really cool melody that still survives today, and I wanted to explain to you in the best terms that I can as to what it means to actually do something like why it is that chord progressions are actually called progressions. So pardon me while I kick finale up in here, uh, and I want you to listen to La Folia. There's this song that's called La Folia de la España, and while this is all kicking up, uh, I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about it. Its name, it's been translated by different things, but or in different ways. But what I know about it is there it is. What little I know about it right now is that it's an old piece of music, and even though it's called La Folia de España, the La Folia, by the way, it means it's a female gender. By the way, in Latin languages, uh, all the nouns and stuff like that have genders to them. So I don't know if those of you guys that know Spanish or Italian or you know all that kind of stuff, that we speak in our all our nouns have genders to them. Um, and in this case, La Folia is talking about a young lady who probably didn't have a whole lot of sense. So if I was going to translate that to a 20th century, even though it's a non-PC type of term, I would call it the airhead. Now, mind you, there are male airheads too. But in this case, in this particular music, they're saying this was a young lady who didn't have a whole lot of sense, and she lived in Spain. And so the way that we know that this particular lady didn't have a whole lot of sense is because she danced this crazy dance. And so what's funny about La Folia is that that even though they call it La Folia de España, it actually comes from which means the airhead from Spain, kind of. That's my translation of it. Uh, it actually grows out of a folk dance that was predating, you know, any of this polyphony type of stuff that predated that, and it was it was from Portugal. So it was a Portuguese dance that was actually danced after this thing. It was like a crazy dance. It was kind of like, I don't know, kind of like like the Macarena, kind of like that, like a medieval Macarena. There we go. That's what La Folia is. So I want to share this with you. Let me see if Finale will do this. So I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Finale, but this is Finale. And let me just kind of resize this so you can kind of see. So this bass line, right? By the way, there are two kinds of La Folia. One of them is called early Folia, and the other one is called later Folia. This one is a later one. This is the one that actually I think survives the most today. A lot of composers and a lot of music that you have heard are based on this progression. It is so cool and it's so familiar that is, you know, you're talking about something that's 1,000 years old and it's still familiar and it still gets you to home base. And so if you're just kind of looking at it from the outside here, notice that from the beginning to this double bar, it has kind of a shape here. And it has the same shape here. The only difference is really the last two measures of each are slightly different. But the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 measures or so are the same for both of them. So that means that there's a repeat to this. What La Folia means to me, what this kind of progression means to me, is the musical equivalent to, if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, songs like La Folia kind of mean the same to me. It's the first thing that you do is you go to this peaceful home. Think of Star Wars, you know. So you're in Tatooine, right? So you're at home, everything's fine, hunky dory. Something happens and it moves you out of your comfort zone. Oh my God, there's trouble, you know. And so the hero gets kind of pushed out the door, and so you go through these trials and tribulations and all of that kind of stuff. And at the end, you kind of go back home, and you're a much more, you're wiser, you're the cool dude in town, so to speak. So I want you to listen to this and see You're probably not going to hear what I hear in it because I make too much out of things anyway. But just listen to this progression and see if it sounds somewhat familiar to you, and see if you can feel the home bass feel to it. Please tell me you're going to play it. Oh, that would be sad if it doesn't. I'm going to let you listen to it a few times. So as you're listening to this, we have two possibilities that I've actually written down here. Do you feel, and mind you, I'm changing clefs here, but do you feel that this piece's home bass is actually, I just kind of did this wrong. I'm actually in the wrong key. G, yeah. Whoops, sorry. There's another example of that I like to use. It's in a different key. So let me just kind of rewrite this for 1 second. It looks to me that the note that's the most repeated, the note that we're starting with, is what? So if you see this note right here, that note right there is G. This note right here is G. Right? So you can kind of see that this note right here is not G, this note right here is D. And this note right here is what? Is G also. So you can kind of see G and G. You can see G here. So by the use of the G, we can kind of assume that G is actually our home bass. Okay? So now let's just kind of see what happens if I take this and I just kind of go with a key signature that's actually supplied to me, and I just build a scale on G like that. All right. Technically speaking, if I was going to actually do this, I should probably put another flat in there, but I'm not going to. I'll just leave it the way that it is. So, if I was going to give these guys numbers, this would be 1, this would be 2, this is 3, this is 4, this is 5, 6, 7, and 8. Or actually, I should go back to 1 there anyway. So look at what he's doing here. He's doing 1, 5, 1. I'm saying he, it could have been a she. Who knows who wrote this? So this is 7, this is 3, this is 7, this is 1, this is 5. You see? And this is 1, this is 5, this is 1, this is 7, this is 3, this is 7, 1, and 1. So you're listening to this and you're saying, okay, well, what's home bass? And listen to the use that what he does to play between the 1 and the 5. See if you can tell where is the most dissonant. That's not dissonance. Ah, hear that? Back to that. Now, this is something, pay attention, even though now we know that G is our home bass. Look at what D is doing, what that D is doing here in the middle of the song. It's kind of a deception. You see, it kind of wants to, I want to go home, but the 5 is not quite home, is it? It sounds homey, but it's not quite. It's kind of like, it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek type of thing. We're not done yet. We're not done yet. Okay, I'm going to stop it because you guys are going to have nightmares about this tonight. All right, so what I want to do is that I want to show you what early polyphony did. And so let me show you what it looks like when they just added one little note to it. Oh, come on. Let me see where you are. There you are. And all right. So this is all they did. They kept the same, we just counted, I'm keeping the same line at the bottom, but all I'm doing is I'm just adding, like those two guys that you heard sing, I'm just adding another line at the top there. Listen to the way that this sounds. So in 16 measures, you see the hero's journey. You can see a master manipulating home bass. You can see him actually developing the whole story. The whole story is laid out in front of you just in 16 bars. And your imagination kind of runs along with it if you want to let it do that. The song is a catchy song. Just by repetition, you can whistle the tune. This song by itself has been so influential in Western music that you can hear it. You can blatantly hear it in a lot of people stealing from it. As a matter of fact, they tell you, I stole from this. Salieri wrote a set of variations on this that was actually masterful. If I don't care what Hollywood says about Salieri. Salieri ended up being a good dude. He didn't kill Mozart. You know, but there's actually a set of variations that he wrote exactly on this that are just absolutely genius, and you should probably look that up to see how it is that a master at that time, when they were writing at their best, took something as simple as this and just kind of really manipulated and worked it and worked it and worked it. Because this is super simple. It's a very, very simple example of how it is that your mind perceives home base. And look at what they did with the dissonance. Look what they did with that F sharp. Where is that F sharp always going? It's going to the G. You see that? It's emphasizing, I'm going home, I'm going home, I'm going home. You see that? Always, always, always leading back up to that G. That's what's called a leading tone. And that's how they're using it. And it's a groovy little thing right here, La Folia de la Espana. Very, very influential piece of music through time. People use this and they don't even know. Compositions are based on this, and people didn't even realize that they were using this as a bass or a thematic, bass, because it's such a common expectation from the Western listener to actually have something like this. You probably have, by the time that you were 5 or 6, you probably heard variants of this song, I don't know how many times, thousands of times. And you can hear it in pop music and all that kind of stuff even now. So it's just a matter of being aware of how all of this kind of pans out. So if you do active listening, you'll start listening for things like these, and it's actually exciting to see how it is that an artist can take something like this and just turn it into their own language. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you tonight. Let me see if there's anything else so important that I wanted to. So that was a Folia, and that's Salieri's thing in there. Well, we can get into modern notation in jazz, which is the next thing. We'll get into this the next time and actually look at not just triads but also tetrads and stuff like that. So we're getting into some kind of boring stuff, but the listening examples are a lot more exciting than that. And I think that there was one more. I think there was one more thing that I wanted to show you here, which was not the. Oh yeah. Let me do something here. Whoa, that's loud. Okay. Just a couple of seconds. I started with this the last time, and I'm gonna end with this time because I think it's really cool. Yeah. I'm gonna let you listen to the Batman theme, and so listen to what they did with this thing, because it's the same thing. It's the same thing that La Folia did. It's not La Folia, but if you listen to it the same way, you can discover a lot of pieces of music along with it. So check this out. Let's see. Same chord. Going up. Back. Up. Down. And we're home. And we do the whole thing again. So you can repeat this, I don't know how many. You can repeat that thing so many times it's not even funny. The Batman thing. This is just a little slower. I guess I could speed it up a little bit. All right, so that's enough of that. But you can kind of see the cool thing about this is that if you kind of step back and you look at I know that that's kind of tiny, but if you look at the whole thing, it's the same kind of thing that they did with La Folia. Actually, this is even simpler. This is just a 12-bar blues. And so what they did is that they took this whole the tonality for this and this is in G minor, and so this is 1 for 4 measures, and then they go to the 5. I'm sorry, they go to the 4 for 2 measures, and then they return back to the 1, and then they go to the 5, and then the 4, and then the 1, and that's it. That's a 12-bar blues, and you see that progression over and over and over and over in modern music, in modern pop music. So many examples of this exist. I just kind of picked Batman because in this format it was the easiest thing that I could pick. But you listen to any band and out there that's playing any even progressive rock and stuff like that, everything is rooted around this for Western modern music in pop and that kind of stuff. So you'll even see La Folia mixed with all of this kind of stuff. All right. So diatribe for tonight, homework for tonight is, yeah, and Warren, the 1451 or 1541. Didn't I do that? Yeah, 541. Yeah. And so the homework for this week is going to be get into active listening and actually do as much of that as you can on purpose. It can be, I don't care if you listen to YouTube, you don't have to listen to, I mean, whatever it is that you want to listen to it with Batman and La Folia in mind. See how it is that the composers want to return you home. A lot of times that's done by repetition, by choosing the diatonic scale, and see how it is that they're actually manipulating what they want you to see out of this whole thing, and listening with in other words, looking at that piece of art through your ears. Okay. All right. I think that we're done for the evening. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'm sorry I was a little scattered, but today was rather interesting for me. So that's it. We're done. Bye. All right.